Good evening. I'm going to give this a second for some people to sign in, but good evening and welcome to the third of our Thursday night town halls. My name is Richard Tucker and I'm running for District 56 Senate seat. And this evening we're going to be spending some time talking about gun safety, and we're going to be talking with Bob Mokos from Everytown for gun safety. But before we get into that, and before we talk about that, I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about the events of the last 10 days. When we look back at the murder of George Floyd and all of the events that have taken place since then, certainly the violence and the destruction that took place shortly thereafter. But as we watch that protest morph into a very powerful, peaceful protest, what we saw was just a group of people who have said enough is enough, and we're tired, and the anger changed to just inordinate sadness and frustration. But what I also saw after we passed through the anger was a community of people reaching out and saying, how can we help? How can we participate? And tremendous outpouring. And I think when we look back, one of the turning points I hope that we will look at is this recognition that systemic racism is real, and it is a very real part of our society, and it is ingrained, it is deep, and it is not going to be something that's going to simply disappear with the arrest of the 4 police officers. This is something that is going to be a process that will require a tremendous amount of work. And I know for me, part of that work will be to just simply listen. As I walk down this path, I have come to the very clear realization that some of the journeys that young Black men and Black men in general and people of color have gone through are not a path that I would take. It's clear to me that they would not have sent 4 police officers to arrest me had I given a clerk a potentially counterfeit $20 bill. That wouldn't have been the experience that I would have had. And so I think listening and just working forward is going to be a long process. We're going to talk a little bit about guns tonight and some of the challenges, but we can't also talk about guns without talking about racism in that context as well. And so we'll touch on that. Next week, we will touch on racism more directly with Renita Fisher, who will be joining me as a mom here in the Burnsville in 191 school district, a woman who has been very involved in working with Chief of Police Schwartz and the mayor to talk about having conversations around race, having conversations that are sometimes difficult and sometimes hard to have, but having those conversations. And she's been doing that for a little while now, and she's been very instrumental in trying to open that process up and have people engage in that. And Rita's going to join us next week, and we're going to talk about that. And obviously that's an enormous topic, and we're not going to take on the entire topic, but we are going to talk about it from the perspective of a mom with his son, a young Black man going to school in 191. And what does that look like? What does that feel like? And how do we move forward in light of the context of everything that we've just gone through? So, but tonight, as I say, we're going to talk about Everytown for gun safety. And obviously when you talk about guns in Minnesota, that's a topic that has strong passions on both sides. There are people who feel very strongly on the Second Amendment rights and the feeling that they are being threatened. And there are people who feel very strongly that as a society, we have far, far too many people killed every day, every year by gunfire. And if you're wondering which side of that fence I happen to come down on, I look at the society and say, Yes, we have a Second Amendment. Yes, there are Second Amendment rights, but there are far too many people killed. Far too many people killed. And if you take that assumption, if you take that assertion that as a society we have a problem because we have far too many people who lose their lives to gunfire every single year. And if you start with that fundamental perspective that far too many people die, and we would look at any other situation where a tremendous number of people die from a cause, we would study that. We would bring resources to bear to try to solve that problem. We would have discussions around how do we solve that problem. That's what we need to do relative to guns. That's what we're going to start to talk a little bit about tonight. And so I'm going to bring Bob in and talk a little bit about Everytown for gun safety. So hold on here and I'll bring Bob into the frame. And Bob should be with us in 1 second. Hi, Bob.
Oh, hello, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me tonight. Bob, you're with Everytown for gun safety. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about who Everytown for gun safety is, and then perhaps tell us a little bit about how you came to be involved with them.
Can I reverse that?
You absolutely can.
I had a sister murdered in 1986 in Chicago, and I've always wanted to be able to do something in her honor and memory for gun violence because she was shot as she got out of her car. And it was after Sandy Hook, after I was retired, when I saw those kids slaughtered, and slaughtered is the only term you can use. When those children were slaughtered, I decided that since my government was choosing to do nothing, that I would do something. And so I hunted around and I found Everytown for gun safety, and I became a fellow for them. And Everytown for gun safety is like a mothership. Underneath it is Moms Demand Action.
Okay.
Also underneath it is the Everytown Survivor Network. A survivor is somebody who was either shot or lost a loved one or had a loved one shot or killed. So
that would be part of that. Okay.
And also the Mayors Against Illegal Guns. So Everytown for gun safety is the mothership. They're all one and the same, basically, and they work together. And so as an extension, I also do the Giffords Group. I'm a co-founder of Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety, which we're starting to pick up again. We had a little problem at the first of the year with the bad weather and stuff, but we're picking it up.
Well, we've had a couple of things go on this year that have kind of taken all of us maybe off the course that we thought we'd be on. I thought I'd be out knocking on doors instead of doing videos from my basement, but it's changed a few things.
Can I the scope of the problem, if you don't mind me covering that right off the bat, since you brought it up at the beginning?
Sure.
Every day in this country, approximately 100 people die at the hand of a gun. Every single day, with hundreds more injured. Last year, we had just under 40,000 for the year. And right now, we're approximately 17,000 people dead. And it is you brought up the race issue too, which I think is excellent because gun violence is now the #1 killer of Black children.
You know, and I don't think we know that. I don't think that gets enough attention. I don't think I think that's a statistic that I don't know that we really understand. And when you say a statistic like that, what bothers me is that why aren't we bringing resources to bear to understand, to solve, to try to work through that? What are the things that we can do to do that? Do we truly understand what the causes for that are? I don't think we're because of the NRA, quite frankly, so many of those efforts seem to be blocked. But this is the #1 killer of children of color. Why aren't we looking at that more? Why aren't we doing more?
Well, you would have thought that after Sandy Hook, when 95% of the country wanted criminal background checks on all gun sales, you thought it's a no-brainer and it would be done, and it wasn't done. And it matters who's in office. That's basically it. This is a grassroots movement trying to get people in position. Remember the Koch brothers years ago started by putting people in various offices throughout the country, starting at the city council levels and working their way to the county and then the state levels. And now all these people are involved in positions of authority. And we need to do the same thing and get people in. That's why there's a big movement to get people with Moms Demand Action in Everytown and Giffords to be running for office.
So let's take that for 1 second, because as we look here in Minnesota, we had two issues last year that were passed by the House that died in the Senate, and died maybe is the wrong word, but did not get action in the Senate, and two of them are sort of the hallmark, I think, of Everytown and Moms Demand Action. One was for expanded background checks and to close the loopholes for private sales, and the other was red flag laws. And red flag laws are overwhelmingly supported in the polls, and yet we weren't able to get a hearing in the Minnesota Senate on red flag laws last session.
That's correct. 4 years ago, the House and Senate were both Republican. 2 years ago, Moms Demand Action with other groups worked very, very hard to change both the House and the Senate. We were successful to change the House. So the House went Democrat. So they were gun sense. We hate to say that one's Democrat and one's Republican. What we want are gun sense candidates in there. We want people that just agree that we need to put common sense back into these laws. And so we were able to do that. We've got a common sense House that came up with the bills, passed the bills, moved them on to the Senate, and you can't even get a committee hearing in the Senate because it's being blocked by Gazelka.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, so two things I want to talk about from that. One of which is that red flag laws, which have tremendous amount of support, and one of the reasons as a Democrat running here in this district to replace Dan Hall, because Dan is somebody who was part of the group that was not willing to bring that forward to a hearing, and in fact blocked that and fought against allowing to have that kind of a hearing. And so as someone in this district, to me, that's one of the reasons I'm running, is because we do need to bring those forward and not just have a hearing. Quite frankly, we need to pass them. Both of those are, to your point, common sense legislation to try to move the needle forward from a gun sense, and how do we reduce the number? How do we take some steps to reduce the number of people who are killed every year by gunfire? And those are two steps that is here in Minnesota we should have done, and that's part of the reason I'm running, is because I do support those actions.
Yeah, and I applaud you for doing that, because we need gun sense candidates in there. And I've been in Dan Hall's office several times, and I've tried to talk to him about these issues, and it's hard to be in there and educate somebody and still try to promote something at the same time, because Dan Hall needs to really look at the issue and study it and learn the facts about it, as opposed to listening to the gun manufacturing lobby, which is funding campaigns out there. Whether they're funding his campaign or not, I really don't know. But they talk about the red flag bills. The first thing they say about the red flag bill is that mental health is the issue, because that one is based on mental health. But when it comes to a mass shooter, yes, mental health might be an issue with somebody who's choosing to use a gun to take their own life. Right. But the mass shooters and whatnot, that's more of a violence and a violence in their background as they grow up, so that they take that out there. And if somebody in the family can recognize this violent behavior, they can go to a judge and appeal to the judge that we need to have the guns removed out of this person's house. And it's only for a limited amount of time. This is not something that's forever. It's a limited amount of time for this person to get stable and get help. And when that time runs out, this person can get their guns back.
Well, I think there are 2 points that I want to make sure that we cover on that. One of which is one of the arguments is, well, there isn't a due process. There is a due process, and it's not something that can be done on a whim. There's a process involved as part of the legislation. There's a process involved in order to temporarily take someone's guns when they are deemed to be a threat to themselves or the public. There's a process involved. It isn't just somebody taking it upon themselves. They have to go to the local authorities. They have to bring that before a judge and then do that. And then there's a due process hearing after the fact when they have the opportunity to present why they should be able to keep their guns. But these are deadly weapons, and this is not taking somebody's car. This is a deadly weapon that we're taking away from somebody who could be an injury to themselves or to the public. So I think that we forget that sometimes. The other is, and you mentioned this, and I want to go back to this for a second. You talked about the Giffords and gun owners trying to get common sense gun legislation through. And I think it's important to note, none of this is trying to take people's guns away. The background checks, all of these things are to try to create some common sense about how do we try to reduce the number of people who are killed by gunfire every year. But you made a comment about people who have guns. You have a gun, I believe, and so do the Giffords.
That's right. I'm a gun owner, and I'm also a veteran. So,
right.
And both Gabby Giffords and Mark Giffords own guns.
Right. And I think
they'll gladly talk to you about them. They're very open people about it.
Well, and I think, as I recall, you had shared with me at one point in time your history. You started out as someone who was a high school marksman, and were someone who was
Sharpshooter.
I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. All right.
Okay. I shot as a kid. Yes, I shot from about the age of 12 to about 18 or 19. I forget.
Okay. All right.
On a rifle team. It was a rifle team.
This is not, because I think there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction out there that anybody who wants to have a conversation around gun safety and how do we try to reduce the number of people who are killed every year by guns in this country, that automatically is a knee-jerk reaction instilled by the NRA that, oh, what you're really trying to do is take my gun. And that's not true.
No, it's not. When I learned how to shoot a gun, I was trained by NRA professionals. I was part of the NRA. I shot in NRA-sponsored tournaments. So I was what the NRA used to be about, a gun safety and sportsman organization. It no longer is that. It's now a lobbying arm for the gun manufacturing industry. When Wayne LaPierre stands up there and talks about, this is about your Second Amendment rights, they're coming after your guns, be careful who you vote for. If it really was about your Second Amendment right and to have a gun to protect this country in case of an oppressive government, they had their chance to do that the last few days, because there was nothing more oppressive than what was going on in Washington, D.C. And the NRA was nowhere to be found. This is about money to the gun manufacturing lobby.
Right. And that's exactly what it is. And from a person who spent his life in marketing and sales, one of the things I would begrudgingly take my hat off to the NRA and say they have done a very good job at their mission, which was to get more people to buy guns for the manufacturers. That was their mission. And quite frankly, they've done a very good job of doing that, because they have scared people into feeling like every time a Democrat was going to come into office, they were going to take your guns. And therefore, the number of sales skyrocketed when President Obama came in both terms. The irony was that when Donald Trump came into office, gun sales fell, because their whole theory was panic buying, and that changed that whole narrative, which I thought was quite ironic and interesting, that gun sales actually fell down.
They use fear. And they appeal to people's fear and passions in order to sell weapons.
So let's go back to the legislative process. So we're talking about really trying to institute gun safety. There was a third piece of that gun safety measure, which I know that Everytown works on, which is responsible gun ownership as well, in terms of locking your guns and safely storing guns. And that's also part of the message of Everytown for gun safety as well. Am I not correct?
Yes. In fact, Moms Demand Action has a program called Be Smart. And the word SMART is an acronym. So each letter stands for something. I would recommend anybody, especially if you have kids in the house, to learn about the Be Smart program, because all it is they're educating you as to how many kids know about the guns and where they are and how to access them when the parents don't even know that. The kids know it. And it's a good learning tool.
Well, I think so. As we kind of walk down through this, and I try to keep these to about 20 to 25 minutes, but what I want to make sure that we touch on, and so we've talked about the red flag laws and the legislative agenda to try to move that forward, and we've talked a little bit about the background checks. But let's take a second, talk a little bit more about how the background checks legislation works, and what is it that it's trying to stop? Because aren't all federal licensed gun sellers required to do a background check already?
That's correct. A federally licensed dealer has to do a background check if you come in to buy a gun. However, I can sell you my gun right now. We can go meet at the Walmart parking lot and I can sell it to you.
Right.
And the law just says that, do you know if he's a gun, got a criminal background or a felon or something? And right. I don't know. I wouldn't ask. Right. That's what they do.
Right.
And you can go on armslist.com, and there are people on armslist.com that sell guns without background checks.
And I think that's really the point, is that there is this whole other side which says, listen, we need to make sure that we are closing those loopholes, because I understand the argument. I want to sell my son to my gun to my son, and it's a private sale, and I should be able to do that, and I shouldn't have to go through the background checks. And then it just begins, well, maybe I should be able to sell it to my neighbor. Well, now I'm going to sell it to somebody at the Target parking lot who I actually have no idea who they are. And where do I draw that line? And so I think you draw the line, instead of drawing it very loose, you draw it very tight, and you just simply say, no, you don't know who you're selling it to, and we're going to have background checks, because tracing is one of the keys. And even though they have made that difficult in terms of putting a database together or anything else that would be useful for law enforcement, it's still very difficult. But even the basics that were allowed from a tracing point of view, you have to at least have that, because it helps law enforcement. And I think that's one of the most important parts. How do we help try to eliminate people who shouldn't have guns having guns? Well, part of that is helping law enforcement go through that process.
Yeah, most of the gun owners and here in the state of Minnesota basically support the background checks and the red flag laws.
So let's hope that if we have success in November, and we have an opportunity to move those forward, because I agree with you. I think those are two very important pieces of legislation that we have to move forward, and most of the people I know who are gun owners are very supportive of those two things as well. And so we just need to keep moving that forward. The other thing I wanted to mention is Everytown for Gun Safety this weekend is Wear Orange, and there's a specific reason for that. And do you want to explain a little bit about what the reason for Wear Orange this weekend is?
Well, Hadiya Pendleton was the girl in Chicago who was shot 2 weeks after performing in her high school band at President Obama's second inauguration. And she got home and she was killed on a stray bullet or some type of crossfire gang warfare. And her friends wanted to honor her, and her birthday is at this time of the year, this time of the month. And she liked the color orange, but more importantly, orange represents don't shoot me, hunters. That's why hunters wear orange. So it's Wear Orange, and her name is Hadiya Pendleton. Chicago. It's a big deal in the gun violence prevention. It's a big deal.
And I think that this weekend, so if you have an opportunity to wear orange this weekend, in memory of and in commemoration of, because I think even as we've been talking here tonight, even in this half hour, people have died at the hands of a gun, and that runs the full range from whether that be somebody who got caught up in a gang situation, all the way through to somebody taking their own life by suicide. Somebody has died since we've been talking. In fact, more than somebody has died since we've been talking through gunfire. And so it is a problem in this country that requires our attention, and it requires us to put some resources behind it. And this is a health crisis not unlike COVID. It's a health crisis in this country that requires our attention and our commitment to work towards that. And that when you tie that into the race on top of that, it makes it even more pressing and even more urgent that we face into and focus on and work towards addressing this in this.
It's a health crisis, it's a social justice issue, and it's a right to life issue. And let's not forget that our children's lives should not be the price we pay for the Second Amendment. That cost was already borne out in our world wars. This is, we have got to fix this problem because our children's lives depend on it. And your right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness trump any amendment.
I appreciate your taking the time tonight to have a great conversation around this very, very important issue, sharing with me what Everytown for Gun Safety is about, what you do. You know where I stand on this. And so as we move forward, I would really hope that you would give me some consideration as you look towards voting in the primary. And so I'm going to give a quick plug out to the primary. You can vote in person from June 26th to August 10th. You can go into the Burnsville, the Savage, or the Lakeville city halls and vote in person as an absentee ballot. You can click on the Secretary of State's website and get a ballot mailed to you in order to vote in the primary. And so I would strongly encourage you to vote in the primary, and then you have those two options as a way to do it. And then the actual voting day is August 11th, and that is the day to go to the polls. The last thing I would ask, because I would ask for your support, and I would ask for your support, whether that be financial or whether that you'd be willing in our district to put a sign in your yard, or if you'd be willing to work and help to our campaign as we work towards the primary and then the election in November. So I appreciate all of the support. Bob, I appreciate your time this evening, and I appreciate everybody taking a few minutes out of your day to listen, and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you all very much, and look forward to seeing you all. Bob, thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I would like to plug everytown.org or text 64433 with the word join.
Perfect. And I'll plug Tucker for mnsenate.com if you want to learn a little bit more, if you want to watch our Thursday night town halls. Thank you all very much. Have a great evening. And with that, I'm going to sign us off.